Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me here this afternoon. Can everybody hear me fine on the Zoom?
Fine.
Yes.
Thank
yes,
you.
perfect.
Good, great. So I'm Shambadeb. I work in the Department of Biology, and I work with Dr. Charles Baer, who is a population geneticist. And I come from the city of Calcutta in India, where I'm trying to do this work on the urban carnivores, especially 3 species of small cats: the leopard cat, the fishing cat, and the jungle cat. So the city of Calcutta has been one of the most populated metros in India. And sorry. Okay. Yeah, so it has been one of the most populated cities in India. And before I go into my landscape, I wanted to talk about what exactly is a mesocarnivore, or how it is to survive in an urban landscape. So mesocarnivores are typically predators which are about 15 kilos or less in body mass. And being small, they are adapted to feed on a number of prey taxa, which include both vertebrate as well as invertebrate preys. And they have been known to coexist with humans because they can survive in different types of landscapes, and which makes them a lot more interesting and diverse in terms of behavior and ecology, as opposed to the more charismatic large carnivores. And in India, we have a lot of large carnivores, the primary being the tiger, and there's the lion and the wolf. So the landscape I work on, that has a history of human migration. It used to be a larger state in the colonial India, and then in 47, when we got independence, the state became divided into what is now West Bengal and what is Bangladesh today. So there has been a lot of human migration happening since the 30s and the 40s, which made it always quite overcrowded, and diverse population of people who are doing white-collar jobs, and then there's blue-collar job people who support these white-collar jobs in their work environment. And it is currently the 7th most populated city in India, having a roughly 4.5 million population. In context, Gainesville, I checked today, has a population of about 140,000. New York has about 8.5 million. Now, if you count my area in Calcutta is not just the city of Calcutta, but the larger metropolitan area of Calcutta, which supports a population of around 14 million people. And it turns out to be the most densely populated part in India currently. So there is a lot of demand in real estate development in the landscape, and you have the landscape changing over a very short period of time due to more and more people trying to migrate into the city, or migrate or find a place near the city so that they can go to and fro from their workplaces, which are usually in the city. That is what comprise of the counties and the districts. Now, I threw in a small land use land cover map over here. So West Bengal has historically been a very agrarian state. Most common agricultural crop being produced is the rice, and they are harvested based on what type of rice is being cultivated across the year, actually. But most of the harvesting happens between May to September, where it's the monsoon season. So when you look at the land cover, it's red is where the actual city is and the suburbs is, and you find that most of the other places is a cropland. And what we have over here is the most interesting national park in India, I would say. It is the Sundarbans National Park. It's one of the largest habitats of mangrove vegetation across the world. And we have a diversity of flora and fauna happening in that landscape. It has been declared a Ramsar site due to its importance for being a wetland ecosystem. And there are, if you notice, most of these green areas, which are basically different sizes of islands formed due to the deltaic region of the Ganges. Ganges flows into the Bay of Bengal over here. And this has been protected by the Indian government, being a national park, and it is home to a number of different animals, including the tiger. And there are a few villages in the what we would say the boundary area of the national park and the fringe areas. They have supported human settlements throughout the last century, where the British tried to utilize this landscape for agricultural purposes. The challenge being the tidal movement kind of dictates the nature of these islands. So living in that area is quite difficult, let alone agriculture. But these settlements, because they have been there for like the last 100 or more years, they have become more or less permanent settlements by now. So that landscape also happens to be the only known refuge of the Indian tiger in the state. And there is a lot of conflict between humans and tigers throughout the last 100 years. And we have a lot of cases of people being attacked, mauled, and killed by tigers, even every year now. So that kind of gives an outline of the landscape that I'm working in. So I have very urban areas around the suburbs of Calcutta. And then I have these areas which are more coastal. And then finally, right on the border of the national park, because the way the forest department works in the state is you are not allowed to go on foot in the national park because there is a constant threat of presence of tigers. So people would basically either not go at all, or if they go in groups, and the government has those kind of activities when they do tiger census and that kind of thing about once in every few years. So you have people going in and doing their census, or you have the inhabitants of these settlements in villages going in for their activities. I'm going to come back to that later. Closer to the city of Calcutta, some of the issues that happen to endanger these animals that I work with are kind of the activities that you have in any aggressively developing urban areas. Highway expansion. The government in India is trying to connect more and more parts across the country with well-made roadways. So you have vegetation being cut away for making way to more land. There is real estate boom in the city, which has resulted in more and more requirement of bricks. And in India, we make bricks out of soil, not the concrete blocks that you have over here. So the soil gets mined out of riverbanks or wetland areas where it's easy to dig out soil. So you have things like this. And there is a brick factory. This chimney is of a brick factory working in the background. And then since the last decade, the state government has tried to add to another dimension of agrarian lifestyle where they are, because it's a lowland state, at least in the southern part of the state, it's mostly lowland and wetland areas. So the government wants to utilize the landscape by putting in more areas to cultivate fish farming. And this is actually quite a boom now because banks and other government agencies, they're giving out nice loans for interested fish farmers. And there are dedicated areas which have been reserved for eco farming purpose. The problem is once a portion is kept for eco farming, people keep increasing the utilized areas. So you have natural wetland over here being expanded, and all of this right up to the tree line in the background, what you see is basically cut out vegetation. Gradually, probably when I go back next time, I'll find all of these have become artificial ponds to support eco farming in the same area. So these wetland areas used to harbor most of the species of these mesocarnivores that I work on. And there's also, as I showed before, being the boundary state, we share the boundary with what is Bangladesh now. So you have different laws coming in as well, being part of the landscape. So it's basically a continuous landscape, but one part being Bangladesh, that part has different laws and they utilize the landscape in a different manner than what we see on the Indian part. And these smaller carnivores, because they are so adaptable, they have survived in urban environment. They mostly in their natural diet consumed things like rodents, birds, and other smaller animals. So as an example of what a mesocarnivore looks like and how coexistence can kind of work here is that we have two mesocarnivores over here shown with night data from camera traps. And this is a work done by one of my collaborators, Chakraborty. We find a fishing cat going along this pond. And then we have a jackal, which is another coexisting carnivore in the same landscape, which is using the same pond area. So yes, and they used to survive on these birds and rodents or field rats that used to live in the crevices of these agricultural lands. But now, because it is being moved on to make way for these eco farmers, and the problem is out of lack of natural prey base, they are turning to things like what these eco farmers are producing, which is fish, which is one of the cat's primary diet, hence it got its name, the fishing cat. And the farming community is not at all supportive. They rarely are because they're losing money for this kind of nuisance that they want to brand these animals as. And they just want to get rid of them. So what I'm trying to get at is due to the change in the landscape and the way the socioeconomic structure across the landscape has changed, what I found this year was that the mentality of people coexisting with these animals has also a very diverse nature. You have these urban people, the city-based people, who sometimes would spot a wild animal in their backyard or in their garden, and they would be happy to just shoo it away as long as it doesn't come into their houses, to the fact that these people who are invested businessmen in these wetland landscape, they consider these animals as pests and they don't want them at all. They would probably rather kill and remove the animal rather than trying to shoo it away. And then you have the Sundarbans people who have a very different approach. So in looking for these kind of small animals is quite a challenge in itself, because what we have usually as direct evidence is when you can sight the animal in the wild, which doesn't work for smaller and more elusive animals like these. So you have to depend on what is secondary evidence. And that involves looking for pug marks that we have over here on soft soil. And you basically, you identify an area which is a habitat of these cats, and then you walk along the ground to look for more evidences of more secondary evidence presence. If you're lucky, you can catch the animal. Once this is a captive fishing cat that I photographed in one of the zoos in Calcutta. But usually I was not able to capture in broad daylight any of these animals. There was only one sighting that I had with a fishing cat. The others are even more elusive. So yeah, and what we work with is pug marks, or we look at trees for scratch marks, and then we look for things like remains of a kill or prey. In this case, a half-eaten fish on the riverbed, and then we have scats which we collect. This is one of the evidences, and for me, the study that I am conducting mostly involves looking at the scats and the fecal matter of these animals and trying to understand from the scat material what exactly has been consumed by the animal in that landscape. So I go around in the habitat where visiting sites which have been identified. So the government of West Bengal have been conducting camera trap based studies on these animals to understand the nature of the extent of presence in conjecture to human habitation. For the last 5 years, they have identified spots where these animals have been camera trapped or photographed, or anecdotally identified by locals living in that area. And they create a database, or try to create a database. So I used that as selection for my study areas, because it's a vast landscape to work in. And I went to these particular areas and looked for fecal samples and the other secondary evidences. Sometimes it might be that people have sighted the animal, or the animal was present maybe a few months to a year back, but now people can't recall seeing that animal anymore, because things are developing pretty fast, and the more habitat gets lost, these animals keep getting pushed out. So how I collected my samples is from the field sites. I would collect it into a collection vial and preserve it in 90% ethanol, and then bring it over to the lab. And using a kit-based extraction technique, I would extract the DNA from the fecal matter, where it's mostly involves precise weighing of the fecal sample. And then, because these kits have regulations of how much sample you can work at one time, and then you extract the DNA and you check the quality of the DNA on an agarose gel. So I have access to molecular laboratory in Calcutta at the Indian Statistical Institute, where I did most of my DNA extraction work. The reason to do that and not bring the samples over to the United States is because the government of India, in its permits, strictly tries to control any matters of biodiversity from getting out or getting into the country. So it is very challenging to get like fecal matters or let alone blood or tissue matters of any Indian flora or fauna from out of the country. So I worked over there and I extracted the DNA, and then one of the challenges is that you don't know exactly what animal you are collecting the fecal sample from when you are out there in the field and looking for scats. So you find a presence of a fecal pellet, you collect it, but then the first challenge becomes to identify which animal this fecal sample came from. So that we use molecular markers to identify that. And typically these markers are taken from the conserved region of the vertebrate mitochondrial genome. For my study, I used the mitochondrial 16S rRNA gene. And once I have identified which animal the fecal matter came from, then I use a further marker to amplify a portion of the vertebrate genome again, because then the objective is to identify which kind of prey matter I'm getting from these fecal samples. So I use that, and I use Illumina sequencing to basically blast out all the presence of vertebrate matter in the fecal sample. And this is, we again choose a region which is very conserved across species, because the idea is to identify and not see diversity within a species, but rather get a general idea of what kind of species I'm finding from the samples. And I have taken this picture from one of the reference papers that I'm working on, where it is basically they have used the same technique to identify prey ways between two mesocarnivores in China, and ultimately the goal is to achieve like at least a genus or order-wise distribution of prey preferences in these carnivore animals. And then I try to, so some of the results that I've already worked on have been coming in so far. So I apart from looking at the dietary variation, something that affects the diet a lot is the microbiome diversity. Something that is connected with the diet is the microbiome diversity in the animals. So I tried to look at using the same technique that we used over there, except that in this case, instead of targeting the vertebrate gene, we are targeting the bacterial genome. And the idea is to see how many different genus of microbiome, the microbiome that exists within the gut of the animal, and that gets passed on with the fecal samples, are we kind of getting in these different taxa of animals. So here I have a mixture of cats coming both from captive as well as wild samples, because for microbiome studies, the challenge is the sample quality is often critical to get results. So I have looked at collections of fecal matter from captive samples, which I know are A, the target animal, and B, that they are very fresh in contrast to what I'm getting in my field. So I tried to throw in a mixture of that, and then using the similar techniques, I checked out what kind of diversity I'm getting. And so one of the largest presence is so far the Clostridium, and we have the Fusobacterium marked in gray and the Clostridium in blue. And these are typically indicative. So far, I'm still going on with the analysis of these results. But the pattern I'm getting, the Clostridium and Fusobacterium, that these have been repeatedly seen in other cat microbiomes that have been published across the world. So I'm getting a signature which is similar to cats. The question is how similar or how dissimilar they are, because that kind of determines their uniqueness in the phylogenetic tree. And so this is ongoing, and my dietary work is also ongoing. And then I looked at something which is, I felt that it's a direct connection with the urbanization in these animals, which is microplastics in their guts. We know microplastics are probably now in our guts as well and everywhere across the world because of the extensive use of plastics. And they are being manufactured on a vast scale. And we know that they are extremely long-lasting, extremely difficult to melt or totally get rid of. So I thought that let's see if there is a presence of microplastic in these samples that I collected. And there are some standardized protocols that I followed, which involved using a solution of potassium hydroxide. And then you basically have to keep the sample on a kind of heated environment for at least a few days or until the entire sample kind of digests out. Plastic being indigestible will always be left behind. So then you basically filtrate out the plastic and check for what kind of presence you're getting. And kind of the brief outline that I was taking for this is like that. And then my collaborators in India, they did microscope-based photography of what they were finding in the samples. And sure enough, there are samples of microplastics coming in from all of these locations. So far, we have only worked with the location that's on the settlements outside the Sundarban protected areas, because I thought that maybe if we start with that, there is least amount of habitat destruction in that area. So maybe there will be less presence or no presence of microplastic. Unfortunately, I'm finding these, and we are going to work with the other samples that I collected from the remaining landscape to see how much of the presence of these microplastics are affecting, are flowing through the digestive tracts of these animals. And because they are in these ecosystems, they act as the top predators. The chances of environmental accumulation gets even more in these animals. So what I would love to go along with this is, if I find a prey taxa that is common to a particular environment, then I check for the microplastic presence in that prey taxa and try to correlate that with the microplastic presence in these animals as well. So that was most of the fieldwork-based findings that I have had so far. Now, I wanted to talk about one of the landscape that I have worked with, which is the Sundarbans area, because I found this to be a very something that I had never experienced in my life before. Although it's about 4 to 5 hours drive from Calcutta, I only went there once before, and this time I had the opportunity to go a few times and see how it is, and the kind of challenges that exist in that landscape, and the kind of issues that working in that area can provide you. Firstly, it is, as I said, a landscape of about more than 100 islands, and these are all crisscrossed by the different tributaries of the Ganges as it kind of flows out into the Bay of Bengal, the ocean. The human settlements that I was talking about in the past have been there for the last 100 years, and people have to go from one place to the other by ferry boats, and they're connected to the landmass, the main landmass, at different small, I would say, these you wouldn't call them ports, but they're like ferry points where you can come in and go to the mainland and kind of continue on your journey. And it's connected by a train line from the mainland. But then at the end of this, you basically have to go to your own village by these ferry system. There is no gas station on these islands. So people would bring their motorbikes, which is a primary mode of transportation in these islands. You have roadways, but very little concrete roadways, mostly hard soil, hard mud, wood roadways that connect these within these islands. And they would bring their motorbikes to the mainland and get a full tank and then ferry it across again to the islands. So that is one of the challenges. Most of the people in this area, they are working as either laborers in the mainland portions, working as construction laborers, or they are like these people who go for collection of crabs or prawn seeds from the denser parts of these habitats. And because there's a particular species of crab that happens there, which has a pretty high value on the market, and they would collect those or go for fishing for daily consumption. And these are the situations where they get the most in contact with the Indian Bengal tiger, which probably kills about 20 to 30 people every year in this area. So the government has tried different approaches. They have not been quite foolproof. One of the things they tried was kind of separating out the more dense tiger habitats from the human occupied settlements by using what we have as nylon nets. So these are kind of fiber nets, but made of like synthetic fiber, which is difficult to chew and tear by the tigers. That kind of worked. But because the people have to go back and forth into the islands they used to go more often, now you have a structured system where there is like a family who have a history of crab collection or honey collection can get a permit, but only one permit per family, and the government tries to restrict it that way. You have a lot of offenders as well who try to, because they're trying to make their ends meet. And I threw in this picture of nice bottled water containing something other than water. That's fuel. They bring petrol from gas from the mainland in these 2-liter bottles or 3-liter bottles, and they will sell it on the islands as an emergency ration for people. It's a very soft soil based landscape, so you can't really put your foot in and you immediately go up to your knee deep over there. Shoes are more of a hindrance, so it's better if you work barefoot, because you can't grip with your shoes, and the heavier boots just drag you along, so it's challenging. And in general, it has been a very poor socioeconomic situation over there. But the positive thing is, because these people have a history of coexisting with these apex predators as well as the small scale predators, they have a very different mindset about these animals. And the tiger actually, although it kills and there is conflict going on, it is actually worshipped as a deity in this landscape. So they will, if they are going into the forest to gather honey or fish spawn, prawn seeds, they would like go and worship to the tiger god so that they will be protected against its wrath. That is also there. So a very interesting socio cultural belief exists in that area. Unlike the fact these are not indigenous communities, there have been settlers who were brought in by the British, mind you, not the what you call would be like natives to that landscape only. So the reason I kind of mention all of this is because one aspect of my study is I'm trying to look at the social perspective towards these animals across this landscape. And I found that it's very challenging to kind of quantify that in one questionnaire-based study or some kind of that. And I'm not a social science person, so I lack the training. But I would love to have somebody who has a more social science training kind of work on these questions and help me out with what I'm trying to get at here. So what I have gathered so far is, like I was saying, the mentality of urban people, the city people, is that they just consider it as a kind of nuisance, these cats, and they would try to just shoo them away from their properties. But then you have, like I was saying, the businessman community who are the eco farmers, and then finally you have these people who are at the probably on an economic perspective, they're at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale, but they still have a lot of tolerance for these animals. So there's a very shift in mindset, and it's not really connected to your socioeconomic status. At least that's the part that I got. There's a lot more to it that I'm not getting. And so yeah, that's something that I'm trying to get. And then how to kind of work in this area. There's always got to be a lot of support from agencies and the government agencies who are working in this area. So I teamed up with this nonprofit who work in that area called the Society for Heritage and Ecological Researches, SHER. And they have been working in the fringe areas of the Sundarbans for the last almost a decade now. And they are very, they work with trying to mitigate incidents of human-wildlife conflict in this area. And they act as kind of like first responders and the person between the government forest agencies and the human populace, trying to connect the two equations. And being being the farthest of the coastal area, they are always subject to the most of the natural calamities. they got hit with a disastrous cyclone or hurricane in 2020 during the COVID 2021, and a lot of the houses got destroyed, livestock was lost, and Share kind of helped in developing school buildings, providing children with books and school uniforms. So that has been of immense help to me for my work. The West Bengal Forest authorities, they are limited in their actions because of the challenges in the landscape, but they were kind enough to provide me with the permits and guide me with the areas where to work with, where I basically went to the villages, and with the help of Share, I was able to build communication with the local people to act as my field guides. And of course, my laboratory work couldn't have been complete if it had been not for the Indian Statistical Institute. And my work really is on the basis of the support of that I got from TCD this year for doing this field work. And Tonoy Mukherjee is at the Indian Statistical Institute in Calcutta. Dr. Longo, who has been very helpful with the microbiome work, and my friend who is from the University of Calcutta, who has been working on these fishing cats for the last 3-4 years now. Yeah, and then I'd like to take any questions.